Hello everyone, welcome to today's video and my Chinese pepper bonsai tree that you can see here. You can often find this also under the name Sichuan pepper, Japanese pepper or just pepper tree. So it comes under many different names. It's all the same variety. It all is used mainly as an indoor bonsai in more temperate climates as I am here in Austria. And I thought in today's video I'd just talk a bit about how to care for this variety, what to keep in mind when getting it, how to maintain its health and shape, and also more specifically how to take care of it in winter. As I said, it is an indoor variety, or is often used as an indoor variety. So of course winter is always a big question, how to best take care of your tree. So I would say let's get right into it with just a general look on how to take care of this tree. As I said, in a temperate climate, it is rather used as an indoor bonsai, meaning you keep it inside your flat or house. Where should you keep it in your house? So the brightest spot is often the best spot for your bonsai, for your indoor bonsai especially, because in the end it is a plant that is normally used to being outside. So you should keep it in as much direct light as possible. And I really mean direct light. So this one gets at least 4 hours of direct sunlight each day. I also keep it in my living room, which tends to be a more cool room in my flat. So that is also something that is more beneficial for those trees, to not keep it in a too hot environment. And generally speaking, in summer, I do keep this one on my balcony outside because, as I said, it is a plant. It does benefit a lot from simply being out in nature, being in an environment that it's used to in general anyway. But of course, here, as it gets below freezing temperatures in winter, I do keep it inside over winter, and I overwinter it in my living room. When I have it inside, important thing that I also do is, of course, turn it from time to time, because otherwise it does tend to grow in one direction only. So simply by every 2 weeks, I would say, turning it around, you will have more even growth throughout your tree. So that is definitely something I can recommend. I have seen it on other trees also. If you do forget to turn them, they do end up looking a bit one-sided after a while. When it comes to the soil for your tree, always opt for a very airy soil with a lot of inorganic matter in it. So to give you a view here, I do use certain clay pebbles. But you can see also the water in my area is quite hard, so you get a lot of this calcium basically, or this just mineral residue on top of the soil. It doesn't harm the tree, it's just a sign of an area with very hard water. I think you can actually get rid of it by using diluted hydrogen peroxide, if I'm not wrong, because it simply then dissolves the minerals again, and the soil looks again a bit fresher simply. But as I said, it doesn't harm your tree. When it comes to watering, what I do is I simply check if the top soil or the top part of the soil is dry, then I water it, because you should never fully let this variety dry out, but also don't have it stand in water, definitely. Also make sure it has free drainage holes in the bottom of the pot, so it doesn't sit in water for too long. Good, I think for the general look of the tree, this already gives you a good idea on how to keep the tree. Then more specifically, how do we maintain the health of this tree, and how do we also maintain the shape of this tree? The health, of course, what is next to watering also very much needed is feeding. In summer, so in growth season, I do feed this one every 2 weeks with simple liquid fertilizer that you normally dilute just in the water you use to water the tree anyway, and then water it with it every 2 weeks, as I said. And it keeps the tree healthy, it gives it all the nutrients it needs to have healthy growth. And over summer, that is definitely every 2 weeks for me, more than enough to really feed this tree. When we look at pruning, so maintaining the shape, you normally look at the leaves, and on the branches you often have multiple leaves then of course coming after each other. When pruning back, it does make sense to prune back to around 2 leaf pairs basically, to keep them on the branch so the branch is still viable and then can grow from these cutting points again. You can wire this tree also, as you probably can also see here on my tree. There is some wire applied to it at the moment. so definitely possible to wire it. What you do have to keep in mind is that the wood hardens very fast on this tree, so do not keep the wire on for too long because it can quite quickly then cut into the wood once it gets hardened, and then it can leave unsightly marks for long on the tree. So do always just keep an eye on it, seeing if the shape already would hold without the wire. I do think actually looking at this tree, I could take most of the wire already off. It should probably already have settled in the shape that I intended for it. When it comes to repotting, I would recommend looking at it every 3 to 4 years. So simply lifting it a bit out of the pot. I won't do it here now because I have repotted this not too long ago, so it's still quite loose in the soil. I know this, it's not root bound or anything, but after 3 to 4 years, I would say you can simply lift it a bit if it's not tied in, and that is possible, of course, and check if you can see roots developing around and running around the pot inside. Then it's definitely time to repot, where you take it out of the pot, you cut back any excess root mass, and then either pot it in the same size if you do cut a lot of the root mass, or if the tree is at a stage where a bigger pot would be beneficial for it, then of course replant it in a bigger pot. The shape of the tree itself, you can see here one of the more common shapes that you can find this tree in, which is the informal upright shape. This one used to be actually a broom shape, so this is the other shape that you find more often, which is basically just straight up the trunk and then on top all the foliage. I wasn't quite happy with how it looked like because it had a lot of lower branches, and that's why I decided to give it a try at an informal upright shape, and I think it's coming along quite nicely and it's definitely on a good way. You can see, as I said, on this tree you can go in with quite hard structural pruning, also of course to improve the taper, so basically how the trunk line develops and how it goes from a very thick base of the trunk to more and more thin until the apex. That is something that you can achieve by cutting back the apex once in a while. And I did it here, so you still have a quite new scar here actually that has not fully calloused over, has also not fully died back yet. That's why I still leave like this part on it here, because I don't want it dying back too much and then losing the entire apex here. But you can go quite hard when it comes to pruning and cutting back. You can also see here lower branches I took out at previous points. They normally do callus over after a couple of months and sometimes even years, depending on the size of the cut. What you do have to keep in mind is with bigger cuts, maybe even bigger than that, you might want to put something over it to seal the wound, so some sealing paste. In this case, I decided against it because until now I never really had any problems with infections on trees. So up to this point I got lucky with it, but probably at a bigger cut like this, I would also apply some paste over it to just seal the wound and make sure no infection gets in. Good. What you also can do to maintain it is, of course, also to check if there is certain pests on your tree. That is always something you have to keep in mind. Chinese pepper is not necessarily that prone to any pests developing on it. What I do recommend is after winter looking through the foliage if you can spot any aphids. So that is something that can appear on the tree. Simply checking the leaves, also the underside of the leaves, if you find any aphids there. How I normally treat them is with water diluted with dishwashing soap. Normally takes care of aphids the best way possible, so I never had a problem afterwards. And it does not harm the tree, so you can even apply it to the soil. Give it a rinse through the soil, of course not using too much dishwashing soap, just 2-3 drops in basically a spray bottle. It really helps quite well with aphids, and it does not harm the tree. So definitely what I would recommend when you see aphids on your tree. And of course, one more thing that you should keep in mind is that when it is already a bit sickly from a pest that you can find on it, of course you shouldn't go too hard then on the pruning at this stage. You shouldn't work too much on the tree then. You always should have a healthy tree before you start working on it. So if your tree is already in a bad shape, it is not the best decision then to go in and repot it, for example, or to cut back half of the foliage. So rather than give it some time to rebound and then again continue working on it. In a last bigger topic that I want to look at, and as I also said in the intro, I want to talk a bit about how to care for this one in winter. As is the case with most indoor bonsai, winter is often this season in which the trees suffer the most, and in the season where most people start losing some of their trees, because it simply is more difficult to keep it in winter inside. In summer growth season, a tree normally is more vigorous anyway. In winter it becomes more weak, and if then certain conditions aren't met, then it definitely becomes a bit more difficult to keep the tree healthy. So what do we do in winter? Of course, when it comes to watering, we go more sparsely than in summer in general. Depends also very much where you keep your tree. If it is on a windowsill somewhere, I do recommend to not have it on a windowsill where you have heating blasting on the tree directly, because it will make the tree dry out very fast. You might not be able to water them because you think, oh, it's winter, I don't need to water that much. And then you realize the heating has dried out the soil faster than you expected, and suddenly you have a very dry root mass and the tree starts to die. So definitely keep it away from heating. Also simply the dry air is not good for the foliage. So do rather look into having more humid climate, or even inside if possible, for your tree, because it will benefit in winter definitely. In winter inside it is often the case that the air is simply more dry. So by just having a humidity tray, for example, underneath your tree can already help with increasing the humidity around it. So it would basically just be, for example, as the tray is here, you might fill it with a couple of pebble stones and some water inside, and then place the tree on top so it has water evaporating throughout the day, giving it humidity around the foliage. What you also should keep in mind, especially with Chinese pepper trees, is that they tend to lose some and sometimes even all of the leaves when the seasons change, especially from autumn to winter really then. So do not be too afraid when you see that the leaves are getting yellow and dropping. It is often the case with this one, so it is quite dramatic sometimes when it comes to that. Even when also moving it from one room to another, that it starts dropping a lot of the leaves. It doesn't mean your tree is dead, even if it loses all your leaves. Just keep taking care of it. Of course, water extremely sparsely at that point, but it will normally bounce back, either when spring is starting, or even still in winter, simply by getting over this initial shock of a different environment, and then it normally bounces back quite nicely. Important is to not give up completely on the tree, stop watering, for example, completely because it loses all the leaves. It will bounce back, but just water more sparsely because there's no foliage that uses up the water, and normally latest in spring it does come back then. So something to keep in mind, that these, even indoors, often drop the leaves. And what you can also keep in mind, even in winter, when you keep it in a bright spot that's still somewhat cool, it can be that it even continues growing throughout winter, and then it would even make sense to continue feeding it throughout the winter. As long as you see new growth, feeding is always a good idea. But of course, simply adjust to your tree, how it is doing exactly at that time. That is basically my last tip anyway. Always just keep an eye on your tree, on its conditions. They are, of course, very individual, and then try to draw decisions really from your specific tree. If you have any questions about Chinese pepper bonsai still, or if you have any other open things that you want to discuss, of course, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will get to answer them as soon as I see them. If you enjoyed this video and if you found these tips helpful, please leave a like on this video. And if you enjoy this channel, of course, feel free to subscribe to it. And hopefully I will see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.